All right, guys, welcome back to the Take a Closer Look podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Cataldo, and today I'm here at Hebrew Union College with my brother and good friend, Yonatan. Yonatan, you want to introduce yourself to the people?
Yeah, definitely. Hello, everybody. My name is Yonatan Ben-Zion. I am a rabbinical student at Hebrew Union College, Cincinnati campus. I have the opportunity to be with you today, invited by Ryan.
One of the good things about HUC, which I talked about in my intro video, is that you can study to be a scholar here at HUC, you know,
Or
in
to
ancient
become a
Judaism,
rabbi.
or my brother Yonatan here is studying to become a rabbi, and so we have some good conversations about Judaism and early Christianity, and so we decided we were going to get together, do this little video series talking about the concept of Messiah. You want to tell them a little bit about what we decided to do?
Definitely. First of all, I want to underline one single thing. We are not discussing this from the perspective of theology. We're living theologies outside Christianity and Judaism.
We're taking a historical approach.
Yes, we're taking a linguistic, historical, literary approach. Sources, primary sources in this case, Hebrew Bible, rabbinical literature, and has nothing to do over here with building theologies or with saying who's right, who's wrong, why you see this or that. That's not our purpose. If you guys want to do it with the material we're presenting, feel free to do it, but that is not our intention. So our intention is rather to tackle terminological issues and usages of the concept Mashiach, which in Hebrew literally means, it comes from the Hebrew root mem shin chet, which means mashach. Mashach is to anoint someone or something for a greater purpose. Let us just call it like that.
I just want to point out that when we started planning this video, we realized that the issue of Messiah is a big one.
Broad.
So we decided to do the series as what, who, when, why, and so this video is just the what.
Yeah.
What is the concept of Messiah? And as Yonatan pointed out, Messiah comes from the Hebrew word Mashiach, which literally means to be anointed. And the reason that this is the case is because in ancient Israel and in the ancient world in general, when kings were anointed to their position, they would be anointed with oil. They would take oil, they would pour it on their head, and that was part of the coronation ceremony when they were appointed to their position.
So yeah, definitely, Ryan. We are not over here to talk about the who. We believe that the who is rather a form of a function of the what.
Right.
So the Hebrew word Mashiach appears in the Jewish Bible 39 times. And with the same meaning, to anoint. We are going to see it mainly for kings when they were anointed. Saul was anointed. But also we're going to see it as the anointment of priest, a Kohanim, the high priest. We have in the Torah a Kohen Mashiach. The priest, the anointed priest literally means.
Right. So in the Hebrew Bible, there is a lot of messiahs or Mashiachs, a lot of anointed ones. You could read the Bible for yourself and see how many kings they were. They were all technically Mashiachs, right?
Definitely, and not all of them were related to Israel. For example, we have in Isaiah 45 one that God says to Cyrus, a Persian king.
Right, a Persian.
Yes, he says, Ko amar Adonai lemeshicho. Thus said the Lord to his anointed, and le Kodesh to Cyrus, and he was not a Jewish king. So it is rather, here it is interesting to see, Ryan, that this anointment comes from God. God through whether himself directly, as in this very case, or through God, the prophets, unto the kings of Israel. So it is an anointment that comes from above. So it is a divine type of thing.
And it's not always the Messiah, right? There's many Messiahs, but what we're talking about is the concept of the Messiah, right? And I'm emphasizing the definite article "the" because he's not just a king like the many kings. The people of Israel started to look forward to the future for the Messiah, the king, the one who would truly establish the kingdom of God. He would do God's will. He would bring peace and justice to the world.
In this understanding, Ryan, in this line of thinking, I think that it's important to mention that the concept of Mashiach is beyond the point of thinking that the Hebrew word by itself is limited in meaning.
Right.
And that
right.
refers to a single understanding. It develops. It's going to
Right.
be broadened up into what you are mentioning.
It's kind of like when you're cooking. You start out with one ingredient, and then things kind of get added in and mixed together, and you're going to see that with certain ideas in biblical history, and Messiah is one of them.
If we say, well, Mashiach is written in the Bible with reference to kings and priests, at face value, we miss the point. Because
Right.
in that case, we're making some different recipe of what you're mentioning.
Right.
So we're going to start from understanding what the word means, how it developed,
Right.
how was it used. That's what the usages of this word, and into the issues that we are going to really face them, because we're going to face them.
And how it develops into the idea of the Messiah as, a semi-divine figure or a king that would, destroy all the pagans and establish God's kingdom. Mm-hmm. All right, Yonatan, I think a good place to start would be 2 Samuel. And I think that's a good place to start because we see the promise explicitly that God makes to David. David is the second king of Israel. In a sense, he's the first good king, right? Because the Bible talks about David as as a man after God's own heart. He rules over a united Israel before they're split. So David really is like the archetypal king. He becomes kind of a symbol for what it means to be a good king of Israel. And God promises David this in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 to 14. I'm going to read this just because I feel like it's so important for understanding the development of the messianic idea. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. So here, this is the foundational promise, right? God tells David, look, one of your offspring is going to rule on the throne. He's going to be a king of Israel. He even says, I'll be like a father to him. He'll be like a son. And he's going to establish the kingdom forever. And so already here, we see pretty big claims to ascribe to one person.
And here, we're going to see in Hebrew that the phrase ad olam, as a continuum in time that does not cease, it's been used. It comes back 1, 2, 3 times in these verses that you just read, and this is someone. It cannot be physically King David because we mortals are defined by time. We're finite beings, and this is a figure that has to really take an essence of someone who is going to transpass the physical into the metaphysical. Somebody that is above and beyond time and space and goes all the way, breaches that through into the eternal realm. That is why, Ryan, one of the
Can I jump in real? I just want to jump in on that point because what Yonatan said is important. That Messiah takes on sort of a divine identity, so to speak, or divine characteristics, but still in maybe even in Second Temple Judaism, I think the dominant idea was that Messiah would just be a political, military king. Maybe they've read these things metaphorically. For example, Bar Kokhba, this is a little after the Second Temple era, but he was not seen as a divine figure. Am I mistaken on that? He was just seen as a regular military political ruler. He was just a king in the more human, ordinary sense.
Yes.
But we're pointing out that although that is true, that people just saw the Messiah as a son of David who would be just a regular king, although a remarkable good one and would establish the kingdom, in other strands of Judaism, the Messiah does start to take on divine characteristics and whatnot.
We can mention that definitely.
I just wanted to point that out because some people may say, well, these are just certain sects of Judaism or Christianity that believe that, but most people believed in the Messiah just as a regular human figure, and that's true, and I do want to make that clear. But in a lot of other strands of Judaism, it does start to take on a lot of other ideas, and that's what we're really going to explain here in this
We
video.
have a basic understanding in Judaism of what are the traits or what are the requirements for this individual or for this figure, whatever we want to call it. For example, in Tractate Sanhedrin, in the Talmud 98b, we read, Amar Rav, lo Evrei Alma, ela leDavid, uShmuel, Amar leMoshe, Rabbi Yochanan Amar leMashiach. So what I just read, I will just translate it literally in English. And Rav said, the world was not created but for the sake of David. And Samuel said, for Moses. For Moses' sake was it created. But Rabbi Yochanan said, for the sake of Mashiach. So we may say, well, what do Moses, Samuel, and David have to do with Mashiach? We are not over here speaking about the literal individuals that are mentioned in the Bible, but rather the connotation behind them. In this case, the Mashiach has to have embedded within himself the essence of Moses, which Moses was a political, a national figure, but also Moses from his house, the house of Levi, but Levi, his brother was Aaron the priest, so has the priesthood within it. Samuel, he was Navi, prophet, so has to also have these traits of prophecy within himself, and David king, which has to also be not only a political leader per se, anyone, but kingship. I'm from the house of David.
So you're saying in the rabbinic literature, Messiah is not just a Davidic king, but he's taking on all these other roles as prophet, priest, and so on.
An example of that we're going to see in the Torah with Melchizedek. He has these attributes, and he is equated by Chazal, Chachamim Zichrono Lebracha, the sages of Israel, as a prototype of Mashiach. So these are going to, if we pay attention to these, we are starting to develop from a concept linguistically into an idea. And this idea, it's going to be from broad, is narrowing down into a rather superlative essence or of meaning into one single deposit that has to have this attribute embedded within himself.
What's interesting is you have one concept, Messiah, anointed one, a king, which gets very broad as it takes in other ideas, but at the same time narrows because in certain
we have to get to a
ideology,
crossroad,
which is a very interesting thing that happens.
In a rather Cartesian understanding, we have to have the crossroads in which this point have to cross, and have to cross also time and space. So in this very case, Mashiach goes beyond a simple idea or a simple linguistic connotation.
Right. All right, let me go to Psalm 2, because you see the word Mashiach in the Hebrew Bible quite often, and it's not always in reference to the Messiah, right? The awaited one.
No.
But so let me go to Psalm 2, where it is, I think, used in that sense. And Psalm 2 says, Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth rise up and the rulers band together against the Lord and his anointed, Mashiach, Messiah. I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. This is Jerusalem.
Yes.
So this is the Davidic king ruling in Jerusalem. He said to me, you are my son, today I've become your father. This is echoing the promise of 2 Samuel. So we know this is about, right? This is about the awaited Messiah. Ask me and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. Again, he's going to do some remarkable things.
Yes.
So you can see how when the Jews are looking forward to a final messianic figure that he starts to take on divine, because he's going to do remarkable things. And I imagine they're thinking it's just hard to, how could you perfectly institute the will of God and institute justice and peace in the world and just be an ordinary human? So I imagine the reasoning is that, well, he must have certain divine characteristics, if that makes sense. He starts to take on divine characteristics because this job is so magnificent.
And he has to be that way in order to transcend the physical realm into the metaphysical realm. The metaphysical realm, rather the abode, the space of the spirit, and this the abode of the physical world. And in rabbinic literature, in the Mishnah, Sotat 9, we are going to have some type of requirements or inklings or signs that will help us somehow to identify who the superlative term, HaMashiach, with the definite article in English, the Messiah, is. And it is there is over there in the Mishnah Sotah a phrase that is really remarkable, and it's in Aramaic. It reads "Ikvota de Mashiach," which literally means the footsteps of Mashiach. In Hebrew, we're going to find it in Psalm 89 as "Ikvot Meshichecha," the footstep of your anointed, referring to God's anointed. And ikvota from the Hebrew root akav, which is the same as Jacob, somebody who walks forward towards something and to follow the footsteps. So it is telling us over here that definitely we have the material, we have the blueprint to identify who the superlative figure meant to be.
So as we point out, Messiah takes on divine qualities,
Yes.
and I think we see this developing in the prophets already. In the prophet, way before the rabbinic literature, but in the prophet Isaiah, for
Definitely,
example,
yes.
Isaiah 9:6-7, for example, he says, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders." This is the interesting part. "And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on forever." So you see David's throne is mentioned, establishing the kingdom forever. This echoes Samuel and Psalm 2. Now, a lot of people say, well, these names, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, I've heard some people say that this is Hezekiah. What do you say to that, Yonatan? Or do you think Isaiah's, as Bavard Childs, the prominent biblical scholar, he says we ought to be reading this as Isaiah's looking forward to a messianic figure, not trying to pinpoint it on any person in history. Do you agree with that understanding?
I will answer this with another source, Ryan. I will answer this with a rabbinical source that is telling us something that goes beyond that. And it says, I forgot what it is. It is the Malbim, first of all, he equates David with Mashiach. And related the book of Samuel, not Isaiah, but Samuel, he says one thing. Ki bo talui kiyum ha'olam beshlemuto, which in English we can understand it as, for the existence of the world and his wholeness is dependent on him. Him, Mashiach. David, but he equates David with Mashiach. So this may help us understand that from a Jewish perspective, the existence of the universe is dependent on this figure.
Interesting.
And it is also...
And you see parallels in the New Testament of that kind of idea, that the universe was brought into existence through Jesus and whatnot. So it's a Jewish idea.
It is a Jewish idea. I concerning Hezekiah, I myself, from my Jewish understanding of the sources, I have a hard time reconciling that idea with someone that needs to transcend time and space. There is a part in the Psalms.
So you would agree with Bavard Childs that this is a messianic prophecy.
It is
Isaiah is looking
forward. It's rather forward.
The king that will. Okay.
Yes, because also Daniel is looking forward, and we have all the prophets spoke about this figure in one or other sense. So this figure needs to come in time and space later on to have all this completeness that the Malbim is pointing out over here.
Okay. So the question is then, I think, that most people would ask, how does Isaiah get away with, if these terms, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, if these aren't just references to Hezekiah, because some people argue, well, if you look at the Hebrew name of Hezekiah and some things that are said about him, you could see how these nicknames apply to him. But if it's not that, and he's using these terms in a more literal sense, how could he not get away with that? But these are big terms to ascribe to just a human being, right? Mighty God, everlasting Father. And so I think that in the Hebrew Bible itself, and tell me what you think about this, if you disagree, if you think this is an accurate reading, you see glimpses where the Messiah is being spoken of in terms that seem, divine.
I think, Ryan.
Let me give you an example, real quick. Psalm 45, for example, verses 6 to 7. And this is about the Messiah, as we'll see. It says, "Your throne, O God," talking to the Messiah, "will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom." Right? The Messiah establishes the kingdom, as we've seen in Samuel and other texts. You love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has set you above your companions by anointing you, Mashiach, with the oil of joy. But in the beginning, your throne, O God, this is, I don't know how familiar you are with the Hebrew of this text off the top of your head, but this is directed towards the Messiah figure, right? And he's being called God. I mean,
It is. I think that.
And the only reason I bring this up because I'm trying to conceptualize how Isaiah could ascribe certain terms, like he'll be called mighty God to the Messiah, and then you see glimpses of this in the book of Psalms, for example. But go ahead. I'm sorry for cutting you off.
This understanding definitely it is rooted in rabbinical reasoning. I will have to say that probably that will occupy a video on its own.
Right.
It is rather in the question how, but it's good that we pointed out because just I want to mention one example. In rabbinical literature that is close to medieval times, we're going to have the Parshanim Torah, the Parshanim Mikra, the exegesis of the Torah, of the Jewish Bible, especially what developed in the Iberian Peninsula, Kabbalistic understandings, and not only that, in which we're going to equate one of the names of God, Shaddai, with the servant of God, and then we have over here an issue. That's what I said at the very beginning. Usages and issues of this word,
right,
in which is not equating that as Mashiach, but it's equating that literally as the servant of God, and the servant of God is equated to Mashiach, but has the same name. So how they come with that?
So, sorry, I keep cutting you off just because I think it's good to get clarification for the audience. So you're saying in the rabbinic tradition, they would read Isaiah as giving these big titles and attributes to the Messiah. There would be no problem with that in rabbinic understanding because they're doing the same thing as what you're saying.
What I don't want is to enter into that, not because we don't have a material to back it up from Jewish sources, but rather because I think that explaining that particular verse, that chapter that you're mentioning in the context of Mashiach, we're really occupied to consecrate a video on its own.
Okay.
And we want to, otherwise we want to detour from what we want to say now here, but it is definitely, if the question, let me make it simpler, if the question is, do that chapter relates to Mashiach from a Jewish understanding? Yes, the answer is yes.
All right.
Of course, I'm not saying with this that I know Christianity what it takes it to.
Right.
In Jewish understanding, we take some other way.
Right.
But yes, it is the same.
Right.
It's like I'm giving you this piece of paper. You may do whatever you want with it. I may do a plane. You may do a boat. Right. But it's still.
But it's interesting that there's not a huge disagreement with Christianity and Judaism in terms of the nature of the Messiah, because there's this divine element in both.
Yes.
Psalm 21. This is another interesting text because Isaiah says, "Everlasting Father." He'll be called Everlasting Father. Psalm 21:4 says, He asked you for life and you gave it to him, length of days forever and ever, i.e., everlasting Father. So you can see how there's certain texts in the Hebrew Bible that maybe Isaiah was familiar with, maybe he's not. Maybe it was just in the culture at the time where he could be drawing upon these things to make such a remarkable claim. He's not just pulling it out of thin air.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and just to expand on that, the idea of Messiah taking on, divine characteristics or whatnot, you have Daniel 7, which is probably the most interesting one. And I'm just going to read it because this is a really important text. Daniel 7, verses 13 to 14 says, "In my vision at night I looked up, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days, which is God, and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and people of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." Again, Isaiah 9, 2 Samuel 7, the idea of the Messiah figure establishing the kingdom forever. This all you can kind of see how now all these ingredients are being added, right, to the idea of Messiah. And now you have this new tradition, the Son of Man tradition, which, again, there's debate over everything, who the Son of Man is. But you see it in the book of Enoch. Enoch talks about the Son of Man. Some people say, well, the Son of Man is actually Enoch himself. Some people say, no, he's the messianic figure. But clearly there's a Son of Man figure who ascends into heaven, goes into the presence of God.
Here,
he's given glory and dominion.
Before reaching this point, I want to make clear another thing, that yes, in the Bible, in the Jewish Bible, we're going to have inklings of Mashiach and a lot of figures from, as I mentioned, from kings to priests to even Persian kings being related as Mashiach. But this ultimate Mashiach, we read in Psalm 45, I will read in Hebrew for you. It's Psalm 45:8. Meshachecha Elohim, Elohecha, shemen sasol michaverecha, which means actually God, your God, has anointed you. It's really directed, it's direct speech towards that Mashiach. With the oil of gladness, above your fellows, above those that precede you. So in this understanding, Ryan, this Mashiach has to have more anointing than the previous ones.
Interesting.
And has to be anointed directly by God, and he's in an above position than everybody else.
Interesting.
First of all, when we understand this...
So even the anointing process itself takes on a different meaning. You're saying now it's from God himself, not just the prophet pouring oil on the king's head.
No, and it's more than anybody else.
Wow.
Shemen sasol michaverecha, the oil of gladness. It is in a comparative, it's a particle to compare. Mi chaverecha, from your friends, from your fellows, so from everybody else that was ever called anointed, you have more. You are full with this anointing in a superior way. And that is the ultimate Mashiach, say HaMashiach, the Messiah. So once we understand this, then we'll definitely have over here an individual recipient of that Meshichut, of that messianic idea.
I think one more text that I think really illustrates this idea that the Messiah is not just a human, but a remarkable being, a semi-divine being, is Psalm 110.
Yes.
Now, I just want to let everyone know, and you know as well, that Psalm 110 in the Hebrew has been corrupted, in the sense that it doesn't really make sense. We can't really, verse 3 doesn't really, we don't know what it means. But it's preserved in the Septuagint, in the Greek version of the passage. It's preserved and we can read it. It's still somewhat obscure, but it makes a little more sense. But scholars have reconstructed it, and this is what they think it means. I'll start at verse 1. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies. Again, messianic language. He's ruling in Zion, he's a king in Jerusalem. Verse 3, from the womb of dawn I have begotten you. Israel Noel, the great Israeli scholar, he's talked about this verse, and he says this king is not a son of God in just a metaphorical sense, because all kings were sons of God, right? In an adoptionistic point of view, once you're elevated to a certain position, you're considered a son of God. He's saying this is more literal, like he's more in a more literal sense, the son of God.
It is. Here I want to link this psalm with Daniel 7. Okay. In Daniel 7, we read in 7:9. I watched the thrones. It's in plural. In Aramaic, we read Kalsavan, which is in plural. And then we have a figure, the Atik Yomin, the Ancient of Days, Besides him, there was the one figure was Baal Enosh. Baal in Aramaic, son, Enosh, man, Enosh from Enoshut, humanity, son of humanity, the son of man, and somebody who has a physical, humanly appearance next to the Ancient of Days, referring to Yud Kei Vav Kei, to God himself. But it's in plural. So we have Karsavan in plural. Ibn Ezra tries to give he tackles this issue.
So 2 thrones?
2 thrones,
okay.
or 3, or I don't know. It's a plural.
But it's plural, right?
It's plural, but we have only 2 figures there, 2 subjects.
Right.
The Ancient of Days and this individual who looks like the divinely individual, who looks like a human. And Ibn Ezra, he says in plural, he mentions in plural, Akisaot in Hebrew, which means really the chairs, the thrones, concerning Daniel 7:9. Also in the Talmud, in Tractate Chagiga, 14, and Sanhedrin 38b, we approach this as a duality and as a plurality of thrones being over there. And the understanding from this is that the extra throne has an allusion to Mashiach for David and David Mashiach. So definitely we have this explanation attributed to the big controversy of Rabbi Akiva. He mentions, and then they say, hey, Rabbi Akiva, wait a minute, you're telling us that we have the Shter Rashiyot Bashamayim, like two ruling powers on heaven. And there's a big discussion on that. Of course, Christianity definitely built on that,
right.
And Judaism will then try to later on to fix that. But linguistically, there's nothing to fix. It's plural. Right. Whatever we understand it is there. And yes, I mean, this is understanding this or tackling this.
It's good to point it out, though, because you find it within Judaism and Christianity, in the rabbinic tradition and Christianity. So, to draw a wedge between the two on these issues is maybe not.
Yeah, we may say, well, then the Baal Enosh that is speaking over here has nothing to do with Mashiach. We may say that has nothing to do with Messiah. However, from a Jewish understanding, we have a rabbinical composition that is called Metzudat David. And in Metzudat David, and it was written by rabbis David and Yechiel Altshuler, and they say, well, Ben Enosh is Mashiach. So,
really?
Yeah, they do. From the rabbinical understanding, it is that the Baal Enosh equates to David, and David equates to Mashiach. So it is,
right.
It is there. I mean, we cannot close our eyes to the light that is shed upon ourselves from the primary source.
Right.
And this becomes now controversial, definitely.
Sure.
This David, this ultimate king, this that we're seeing now in rabbinical literature is being linked or equated to the figure that looks like a human, Baal Enosh. We also have it with Rashi. Rashi was one of the greatest interpreters of the Bible, and he says, I would read it in Hebrew exactly what he says about it.
Yeah.
Keval Enosh umelech HaMashiach, which literally means that as a son of man, is the King Messiah. So he literally is saying one-on-one, this figure that Daniel spoke about is the King Messiah. Rashi said that.
Interesting.
So yes, in Judaism we have an understanding that comes. Christianity built on that and developed it into a different direction. Right. But this is a very Jewish understanding.
Right.
Also in the Talmud, in Sanhedrin, Tractate Sanhedrin 98a, we have a discussion about Rabbi Alexandri and Rabbi Joshua ben Levi, that they speak about Mashiach, and they have a big discussion and say, when will he come? When will Mashiach come? And then one of the answers is Mashiach ba ben David. They are calling him Ben. We saw before Baal, now we're calling him Ben, and with David, like the son of David, with reference to Mashiach. It depends on us, whether he comes Vananim, in the clouds, or riding a donkey. Both things. We have only 2 ways. So how do we know? Iman and Ishmaya, if coming in the clouds of heavens, or if coming ride a donkey, depends on Israel. If Israel was a Sakai, which is has the right to it, it has really been, if Israel has gained that attribute for himself, then the Mashiach will come in the clouds. If Israel did not, then will come in the clouds. And we see over here a figure that rabbinical thinking is equating to the Mashiach, and comes in the clouds. So this again, it's more material to formulate
these two manners of coming to Israel, one depicts power, right, and glory, and then coming on a donkey, which comes from Zechariah, depicts a kind of lowly, humble.
Yeah, in Zechariah
Messiah.
9:9, the Rochev al-Chamor is riding on a donkey. Literally, that's what it's reading.
Wow.
And in the Talmud, they approach this. They really approach this. And well, we are going to read definitely in Zechariah 9, as you said. I have it in Hebrew here. Ine malkecha yavo lecha, tzadik v'nosahu, ani v'rochev al chamor. Like literally, yes. Look, hine, behold, malkecha, your king, malkech. It's a feminine. To Jerusalem is referring. It's coming riding on a donkey to you, just like they were the rabbis discussing. And in a likewise spirit, Rajan, in Chalot Rabbati, which is another type of rabbinical literature. Later we are going to discuss on that. This composition exposes the human-like figure of Baal Enosh and argues, and you need to teach about the Messiah when he reveals as flesh and blood. And he reveals himself like that, or as an angel. It's an angel, malach, an envoy, somebody who has been sent. He reveals, when he does that, he reveals as bar, just as the book of Daniel. So these concepts are not foreign to Judaism.
Gotcha.
These concepts are really, really ingrained in rabbinical thinking and understanding of these biblical and Talmudic passages.
Right.
So yes, definitely, Baal Enosh is connected to Mashiach. So from all this, Ryan, we're going to see the seeming transformation that this biblical figure, from a biblical notion to a biblical figure, from the physical into the metaphysical. And we're going to see how the evolution of this understanding goes into play. Definitely this offers new interrogations. And, well, can any of this be equated to God? For Christianity, it makes a lot of sense. For Judaism, we have a different understanding of that.
Sure.
And well, the Achalot literature, for them, well, definitely they can be equated to God. And in mainstream Judaism, the idea may be as well considered a heresy. In Reform Judaism, it's more flexible. Even the idea of God is flexible. And this is a thing that when we cogitate on this uniplurality of Adonai, Elohim, two chairs, Shtel Rashuyot Bashamayim, two ruling powers in heaven,
Right.
all these aspects are not foreign. And then that leads us to the next question.
You think maybe in reaction to Christianity, they started to get downplayed in Judaism?
Definitely, we're going to see in the history of biblical interpretation from a Jewish perspective, we are going to see, especially that what took place in the Iberian Peninsula during medieval times, the debates between Christianity and Judaism influenced a lot. We may discuss that in another video if you want, but definitely there was, just like the Greco-Roman influence on the Mishnah, on the Talmud, on the Judaism of Second Temple was very vivid.
Right.
Also, definitely, this pulmusim, we call in Hebrew, these debates and this sparring, literally, between Christianity and Judaism about who the Messiah is, influenced the interpretation.
All right, so we agree that there is a element of elevation to the Messiah, him being given divine characteristics and whatnot. But another thing that takes place is that this elevated Messiah gets linked with a suffering figure, which is interesting. He's both elevated and glorified, but he's also a suffering servant who suffers. Presumably taken from Isaiah 53, right? Of course, the famous suffering servant hymn, that there's the suffering servant figure that is bruised and struck for the iniquity of the people, and by his suffering the people are saved. And it's interesting, in the Qumran literature, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you have this idea of an elevated messianic being linked with a suffering servant. For example, there's in the Dead Sea Scrolls there is a document called the Glorification Hymn. In this hymn, he's speaking in the first person. We don't know, maybe it's a teacher of righteousness who founded the movement, and maybe this is him writing. We don't really know, but he's speaking in the first person. My glory is incomparable, and apart from me, none is exalted. None shall come to me, for I dwell in heaven. Interesting. I dwell in heaven. Who is like me among the gods? Gods, it's Elohim, which could be angels. So he's above the angels. Then it says this: who is counted as me to be despised, and who is despised as me? He's in heaven. He's higher than the gods, yet he's despised. And then he says, and who is like me, forsaken by men, and is there a companion who resembles me? Takes the language of Isaiah 53, the suffering servant, and applies it. So you have an elevated being combined with a suffering servant, using the language of Isaiah 53. And you have another text, probably about a priestly figure, a priestly Messiah, which we'll get to that. I don't want to confuse people because in the Dead Sea Scrolls, some texts allude that there's multiple messiahs, but that's a whole other thing, which I'll touch on briefly. But this is about a priestly figure, and it says this: he will atone for all the children of his generation, and he will be sent to all the children of his people. His word is like a word of heaven, and his teaching is in accordance with the will of God. Ready? His eternal sun will shine, and his light will be kindled in all the corners of the earth, and it will shine on the darkness. Again, elevation, right? They will speak many words against him, and they will invent many lies and fictions against him, and speak shameful things about him. Evil will overthrow his generation. His situation will be one of lying and violence, and the people will go astray in his days and be confounded. Again, combination, suffering and being elevated at the same time. One more, which is really interesting, Isaiah 52:14, which is part of the suffering servant hymn of Isaiah 53. In the Masoretic text, in the Hebrew Bible as we have it, in verse 14, there's the word mishchat, which we translate as deformed or marred one. In the Qumran text, in the Great Isaiah Scroll, a change takes place. They change it to not mishchat, to meshachti, I have anointed. So the suffering servant figure is anointed. He's the Messiah. Again, combination between elevated divine being and suffering servant.
And in the book of Mishlei, in the book of Proverbs, we have a pasuk, we have a verse that reads, Lifnei kavod anava. Before the glory, it's the humility. And one of the rabbinical understandings of that is that we have Mashiach ben Yosef and we have Mashiach ben David. Not that they are two figures, not that they are, no. We have the Mashiach, which has these two attributes, one as a humble servant and the other one as a mighty king. So makes relation to what you said.
Which parallels to what you said earlier about coming on the clouds or coming on a donkey.
Yes, exactly, definitely. And I know that the Isaiah 53 is, let us call it a classic, in both the Christianity, Judaism discussions on our topic, and also the split for both.
Right.
However, in a rabbinical composition that is called Yalkut Shimoni, they mentioned that the Yalkut Shimoni on Isaiah 53, they tackled this in a very interesting way. And we may, if you invite me again, we may discuss that
you're done.
in another
No,
topic. And definitely we are going to see how the rabbinical understanding it is on that. Definitely we are going to hear probably what the audience is more acquainted with is that Judaism portrays this on Israel physically. Well, that is one understanding. But we have
that the suffering servant is not a figure, but is Israel.
Israel, literally, yes.
Yeah.
The physical Israel, the Jewish people.
You see that in that is an interpretation that
one interpretation.
That
yes.
You see in Judaism. However, is it safe to say that in rabbinic literature they also, like Qumran perhaps, and like the early Christians, are interpreting Isaiah 53 messianically, because in the Talmud, Tractate Sanhedrin 98b, we have this text. It says, "What is his name?" Talking about the Messiah. Yeah. The rabbi said, "His name is," quote, "the leper scholar." Interesting. Yeah. And then, as it is written, that formula that they're about to quote, scripture. Surely he has borne our griefs, carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him a leper, smitten of God and afflicted. Quoting Isaiah 53, applying it to the Messiah.
It is a very controversial chapter. And so controversial it is that the narratives of our different theologies have been really built upon that. And well, it is just a matter of direct object, where the action is going to be placed on, right? And in this case, it is interesting, Isaiah 53 starts with, to whom has the Lord, the arm of the Lord, Zroa Adonai, revealed. So this Zroa, when we speak about the arm of the Lord, Zroa Netuya B'yad Chazaka, I took you out of Egypt with an extended arm and strong hand. I took you out from Egypt, and it's God Himself. So He's telling us to whom has God Himself His arm, which is an allusion also to Mashiach.
Interesting.
We're going to speak about that.
Okay.
But what I want to say with this is that this is a matter of revelation, rather than the pshat, and rather than in the literary aspect that we see over here. And probably the last word I will say now is that this Mashiach ultimately becomes with a direct relation to the Geulah, with the ultimate redemption. And this Geulah has to be brought by a Goel, somebody who redeems in a participle form linguistically. So a Goel brings the Geulah, and this Geulah has to come from God only through Melech HaMashiach, because as we read before, as the Malbim explains, the entireness, the wholeness, shlemut of the world depends on him. And this shlemut is also the peace. It's the same word as the same Hebrew root as shalom, to the fulfillment, the completeness, and to make peace or to close something that was already a distance. We have a gap, let's leashlim. If we had a rip between us, we have to leashlim and bring closer. So this depends on that, and on that ultimate redemption that's going to bring, is going to be brought by the Mashiach, the Agoel.
All right, I think there's just one more thing that I want to touch on that I think is important for everyone to understand, which we alluded to already, that in certain sects of Judaism, particularly in the Qumran group and the Dead Sea Scrolls, you have the idea that there's multiple messiahs. And I don't know if this is found in rabbinic literature. It's definitely not in early Christianity. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the community rule specifically, it talks about the messiahs of Aaron and Israel, which really means there's a messiah from Aaron, which is a priestly messiah, and then a messiah of Israel, which is the Davidic messiah. So they're not just looking for the ultimate king, they're looking for the ultimate priest too.
Yes, definitely.
Because in Israel, the two important roles, so the priest, the high priest, and the king.
We spoke at the beginning. It has to have this attribute: kingship, nevuah, prophecy, and
it gets combined in the rabbinic tradition. It gets combined in early Christianity, and then even in other Dead Sea Scrolls, it gets combined. So they're not all on one page when it comes to their messianic understanding, but there's diversity of opinion within the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves, because we have 11Q Melchizedek, which speaks of a Melchizedek figure that comes back.
Melchizedek, I will take it as a blueprint of the attributes and the ultimate figure of Mashiach ben David that we'll have to have, which we already mentioned before, as Moses, Samuel, and David. The nevuah, the priesthood, and the kingship. And those three things has to be.
I just want to point out, just because some people may not be familiar, Melchizedek is a figure that appears in Genesis. Abraham, the forefather of the Jewish people, has an encounter with this Melchizedek, and it says he's priest and king of Salem, presumably, which is Jerusalem. And so we see Melchizedek pop up in Psalm 110, and we see him pop up in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where, again, these different roles, priest and king, are rolled together. And so, and one more thing, and I think this idea of multiple messiahs, I think it can be traced back to Zechariah, because Zechariah has a vision in, where is it? Zechariah 4, chapter 4, verses 11 through 14. He's got a vision where he sees two olive trees on both sides of a lampstand in the temple. Olive trees symbolizing olive oil, right? And he asked the angel.
He's anointing. Right.
And
we can
thank
link
you.
this to our topic.
And he says, what are these things? And the answer is that they're the two anointed ones that stand before the Lord of the whole earth. So again, you got two anointed messianic figures, and maybe the Qumran group is picking up on this, and you have multiple messiahs. But I think this is a good place to end. And just to recap, so we got the word Mashiach, what that means, then how it turns into the expectation of a Davidic king.
Yes.
And then how that Davidic king starts to take on other attributes.
From these 39 times that we're going to see it, at least 8 or 9 times that the word Mashiach, or the Hebrew root Mem Shin Chet, appears, is going to be related to the ultimate and a superlative figure that is this Mashiach that is to be expected in a future time to come.
Right, awesome. All right, guys. Well, thank you for watching.
Thank you very much.
Stay tuned for the next videos.
Inviting me.
Of course, never again. If you enjoyed this content, please hit the subscribe button. Also hit the little bell, the notification bell. It'll let you know anytime we post new videos. And thank you again for watching, and I hope you guys found it interesting and were edified by it or educated by it, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ryan.